Hey, what's up, everybody? This is International Master David Pruess for Chess.com, and today we've got a really sweet game to look at here. And one of my personal heroes is playing white in this game. I'm just clicking through some of the early moves without too much comment here for you. We're just going to get started. The guy playing white is Lev Polugaevsky, and black has played a Slav defense. Traded off the d5 pawn on c4 in order to get the bishop out on f5, and now white advances a little bit in the center, gaining a little bit more space there. And they're just developing happily, and now white plays e5 to gain space before black is able to execute a trade on f3 and play e5 himself. So white pushes ahead with e5, knight d5, white trades it, and we get this structure here, which usually comes out of an advanced French or an advanced Caro-Kann, right, for white to push e5 like this with this structure. But it can also come out of this line of the Slav quite frequently. And, okay, let's get to this position here where white first turns his attentions to the c-file. Now, with this space advantage on e5, what you'll usually see is somebody trying to launch an attack on the king side as white, using their space advantage there to attack. The presence of the black bishop on h5 right now makes that a little bit harder, plus the black queen and bishop are keeping white from moving a piece to g5. So at the moment, even though white has the space advantage on e5, it's not obvious how he could attack on the king side. So white starts a plan to dominate the c-file. Okay, and his plan is pretty simply to put rooks on c3 and c2. Then possibly at some point he would also have queen to c2, attacking h7, and then he can try and penetrate on c7. So that's kind of the idea. That's what white's sort of threatening here. And because black's rooks aren't completely connected, blocked in by the queen, black can't contest the file as easily, because in a situation like this, white's able to gain a tempo with the rook attacking the queen, and then let's say black moves the queen here to be able to play rook to c8. White could prevent rook to c8 by playing queen c2 here, and white would effectively dominate this file. Okay, and I will add one further point, which is that in this position, another pretty strong-looking move for white would be bishop to b5. Now, you'd probably play queen c2 first to make black defend h7, but bishop b5 is also going to be really a bit annoying for black. So after white played rook to c1, black played the move a6, okay, to deal with bishop b5 and help black fight on the queen side. White plays rook to c3, and now black played a move which I think is definitely a mistake, which is he traded white's knight on f3. I think the reasoning behind this on black's part was that black wasn't sure how to face white's plan of doubling on the c-file, and the idea he'd come up with was to move his knight back to b8 and then to c6 to block the file, and black may have feared that then white would play queen to c2 attacking h7, and then after black moves this pawn, white would be able to keep this knight and play this move g4, and now the bishop, if it comes here, black loses a pawn. So I think black was afraid that this was sort of his last chance to offload this bishop before the queen c2 move came from white. Not totally clear because I never talked to black about this game, but certainly the move he plays trading off on f3 doesn't work well for him, because now this bishop's diagonal becomes uncontested. And it's a real concern for black that they can get attacked on the king side now that they've traded off this bishop. So black continues his plan here, bringing the knight back to c6. Now you see white doesn't have the move queen c2, so white can't get his rook to c7 before black will be able to play knight c6 and control that file, block the file, put pressure on d4. Black's basically one step away from completing his entire strategic plan here. And if white just dilly-dallied, even with a good move like rook to c1, and lets black complete his plan and threaten d4, then I think you'll see that black's whole strategy makes sense. And if white starts playing moves like queen e3 defending the pawn, Black can be quite happy with what he's done here, bring out his queen and increase the pressure on d4 probably. But at this moment where Black's knight is on b8, on its route to c6, Black's temporarily really on his back foot in terms of his coordination, right? His rook on a8's really out of play. The knight's pretty far from play. And here, Polugaevsky struck with a typical move, but certainly a brilliant one in this case because he had to look pretty far ahead to see that this would win for him. So he sacks his bishop on h7 with check, follows up with queen to h5 check, king to g8. Okay, now normally the bishop h7 sack would be followed up by playing a move like knight to g5, threatening checkmate, right? Or playing rook to h3, or somehow if you had a rook on h1, you could move your h-pawn off the file maybe and threaten checkmate on the h-file. But here, in fact, Polugaevsky doesn't have any normal checkmate threat on h7 coming up. So this is very, very different from what you usually have to calculate when you play bishop takes h7. But what Polugaevsky had seen here was a really, really great way of using the supposed rooks dealing with the c-file as a rook lift. So he swings the rook over to g3 now, and he's creating a deadly threat that looks like this. If Black just developed the knight, he's going to come here, threatening g7. Now, if Black defends it with the bishop, he's going to sack his bishop and then bring his queen here. And now Black can't stop him from capturing on g7. Okay? Or if Black tries to defend with g6, he'll sacrifice the rook and break through for a quick checkmate on g7. So after rook g3, that's the threat from Polugaevsky. He wants to bring his bishop to h6 and break through on the g7 square. It's hard for Black to defend that square. So one possible defense here for Black would have been bishop to f8, sort of preemptively trying to defend that square. Then I think what White would do is play bishop to g5, chasing the queen away, and then bishop to f6. Now, this is very nice because he's got the idea of eventually breaking through on g7. But in the meantime, Black has no moves to improve his defenses. Like, he can never move the g-pawn because of queen h8 mate. And his king can't try to flee because the bishop has to stay on f8 defending g7. So White's got really good time to sort of bring his queen to h6, let's say, and then sack on g7 and checkmate Black. So I don't know if Black has any good defense here. What he tried was to block the g-file with g6. And the idea would be to bring his bishop back around on his next move possibly. But meanwhile, he's keeping the possibility of fleeing with his king. So Polugaevsky, however, just immediately tears his king's walls down by sacking the rook, leaving him with very, very few attacking pieces, right? So the pawn has to take because king to f8 would allow checkmate on h8. So the pawn accepts the rook sack, checks here, king moves over here. Now, what's the idea? I mean, to checkmate with just a bishop and queen is really hard. I mean, he would have to bring his bishop here and set up a checkmate on g7, but Black would certainly have time to defend that one threat, right? So what is the idea here for White? Well, first of all, White has no danger of losing because they can just check the Black king back and forth forever here, right? With queen h6, queen g6, etc. But actually, Polugaevsky saw a really long winning variation. You know, if you're interested in testing yourselves, of course, you can pause your video and see if you can calculate it. But first, he captures one more pawn from Black, this e6 pawn with check. Then he can swing back over with check here. And now a very, very important detail. He's going to check with his queen on h5 instead of h6, leaving this square open for his bishop. He knows that the Black king isn't going to come up because that just allows him to bring his bishop in with check, right? So the Black king is still going to stay back on g8. And now he plays his bishop to h6. And he's threatening queen g6, check, and then queen g7 mate. And black doesn't have the rook g8 move to defend against the checkmate because white's playing bishop h6 with his queen on h5 instead of g6. So the black king is actually blocking the rook from defending. So what defenses does that leave black against this threat of check and mate? He's got no way to run for his king because these squares are cut off. He could defend with his bishop. That's what he actually did in the game. Or he could try to cover this square. I see two ways to do that. One would be queen d6, which is silly, right? And the other would be queen over to b6. Now this move also doesn't work out for black because Polugaevsky can take the rook on e8 with check, and black king can come here. And the game would continue on for a bit here, but at this point Polugaevsky has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns against this knight, plus the black king is open, plus right now the rook and knight can't get out. Right? So if he just played a simple move like bishop e3, this position is pretty much clearly winning for white in a variety of ways. So in this situation, black just tried to defend with bishop to f8. Now Polugaevsky checks the black king back into the corner, and now, surprisingly, he trades off one of his two attacking pieces, leaving him with only the queen. Right? What is he up to? Black recaptures, he checks, the black king moves aside, and what's the final blow of the game? Do you see it coming at this point? Now that it's right in front of us? Rook to a3, the second rook lift, and he is threatening to checkmate black by swinging this rook over, and black just resigned here without playing any further moves. I mean, these are grandmasters playing in the qualification for the World Championships about 30 years ago. So, well, 35 years ago. So black can calculate that white's checkmating him. He doesn't need to force him to prove it, but of course you'll probably be a little bit more satisfied if we show you a couple variations here. So black's queen and rook are not in good defensive positions, right? So he would like to lift them to the second rank to like cover some squares, okay? First of all, you can't lift the rook over because just rook g3 and immediately the king is caught in this crosshairs, and if the rook blocks, you just take it, checkmate. So let's say black tries to bring the queen into the game, like queen to e7. Well, again, white will play rook g3 check, king f7, and queen g6 mate. Okay, so let's try a different square for the black queen, right? Let's try moving the black queen right over here to d7. Then white plays rook to g3 check, king over here, and now white will play e6 check, attacking the king and queen. Well, if the queen takes it, which she might as well, then white will play rook g7 check, forcing the king back, and then queen takes queen. And you can see that white will checkmate in just a couple moves. And finally, we've got a third square black could move the queen to try and defend some squares on the king side, even further away over here. And there are multiple things white could do, but one really simple thing would be just to pick up this queen with this rook g7 check and go grab the queen like this. So basically, black has no way to meaningfully include their pieces in the defense of the king here and just resigns to the second rook lift. So first of all, I love this game because of the cascade of sacrifices, right? I mean, he just like sacks one piece after the next, right? One bishop, then a rook, trades off his bishop, and checkmates with his last two pieces. So I like that. Also, I really love games where somebody brings in like all the reserve pieces to the attack very cleverly. And finally, I think it's very instructive and also pretty that he made this attack on the king side possible really with these moves on the c-file, right? Really with his rooks, which were far away from the king side. And I'm going to go back to this position right here for a moment and just show you what I love about this. He moves his rook, his f-rook, to the queen side. That usually means queen side strategy coming, right? Versus people who want to attack on the king side usually play rook a to c1, right? Plays rook f to c1, then rook c3, and it looks like this game is all about this positional fight on the c-file and on the queen side, but it's really also a way to possibly set up the king side attack. Now, right now, he's not having any thought of a king side attack, really, But when black defends against the queenside stuff by trading off that bishop and swinging this piece over to the queenside, now he sees, okay, now there are no pieces on the king side, and I'm going to use my space on the queenside actually to do like 2 different rook lifts and swing over an attack. And I think that's just really, really instructive and beautiful. And what you'll often see high-class players doing is making threats on one side of the board, but being aware that it might lead to play on the other side of the board, depending on how their opponent responds. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.